All right, we are live. I think this is our third History Tech live stream we're doing here, if that's right. That's my guess. I feel like I remember two other ones. Maybe there's another. Anyone joining us, my name is Dan Krutka. I'm an associate professor of social studies education at the University of North Texas, and I'm here with Glenn Wiebe. And Glenn just put out a blog post. So as he introduces himself and talks about his website, I'm going to put up his website link as he talks about it. Tell us a bit, Glenn, what did you put up today?
Well, I think this is the third. I'm losing track too. I'm Glenn Wiebe. I work as a social studies consultant at a educational service agency in central Kansas. Our offices are in Hutchinson. I learned I'm easy to get sidetracked, Dan. You know that. We are now location independent organization, which means go clean out your desk. We don't want you in the office anymore because we're going to eventually downsize to something smaller. I mean, this whole year worth of working at home, there's some silver linings in that. And so the service agency is in Hutchinson, Kansas. I've been there for about 20 years, and I've had a great time just doing social studies and getting to meet people like Dan, and we can have these conversations. And so I posted very quickly on my HistoryTech website a quick blog post. Today's a big day. There's Christmas, 4th of July, and NCAA basketball tournament. Those are the three biggies in our family. And today is the championship game last night. Awesome. Stanford, Arizona played last night. I love basketball. I love the tournament. And Dan and I were saying, well, we're going to talk about this. What should we talk about? And we was like primary sources. Where do you find them? They're online everywhere, but there are almost so many, Dan, right? That we like, which are the best? And so I'm thinking, I'm going to watch basketball later. I'm talking about primary sources. Who are my starters? Right. So who are the Fab Five? And I'm old enough to actually have watched the Fab Five play. And you may not even know, if you're listening to this, who the Fab Five are and what reference that is. Just Google it.
Go look at Elite Eight, right? Juwan Howard is a coach at Michigan.
There you go. So he and I have been around a long time. And so I just quickly threw out a blog post. I knew we were going to be talking today 15, 20 minutes about where to go find primary sources. I'm thinking, well, what are my favorites? And they change all the time, but I've got my favorites. And so if you go to glennwiebe.org, you're going to find the very first top link. Quick top post is going to take you to a very quick couple paragraphs and a link to a PDF that has my 5 favorite primary source archives, and all the ones that are on the bench that are good, but they didn't make the starting 5. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Glenn, as someone who's spent a lot of time on basketball benches during my playing career, I do take offense to those being your favorite. I just would like to think that maybe they're not as talented of websites, but they still put it in.
There are times when you need that one kid to come off the bench because he's a great defensive player, or she can shoot free throws, or she can, everybody's got skills. Everybody's got their own specific sort of thing. And I coached for a long time. Dan, did you ever coach?
That I had planned to be a basketball coach, and
really,
and how luck turned out, I ended up getting a social studies non-coaching job, and decided to go to graduate school, and the extra time led me down a whole different path. So I do have to ask. I only bring up your bracket to see how did you do this year, because I'm at 99.8% in the ESPN brackets right there. So I'm just here to brag. It's just a humble brag. I did pick this championship game. You'll go, as I forecasted, you will see Gonzaga beating Baylor tonight in the title game.
No, it's actually Baylor beating Gonzaga. I'm in the 98th percentile, Dan, so you beat me.
Wow.
You're killing me.
Okay. So
I had trouble. I had trouble early on.
Well, because you probably didn't pick the University of North Texas Mean Green to advance their first title game since the 60s, or their first tournament win since the 60s.
Did they were they in their first 4, or were they actually in the
No, they were in it. They beat Purdue in the first round. So, but let's get back to primary sources. We said we're going to be efficient. So, okay, so with Glenn, you've got your blog post. We will put that in the notes. If you're watching this not live, you're watching this later, we're going to put this in the notes so you can access it at any time. So I'll make sure to add that in on YouTube. All right, so do you want to show us your starters and your bench of primary sources, and then we'll start looking at some of those?
Absolutely. So here we go. My first five, my Fab Five. Seriously, I did this earlier.
So we're using StreamYard if anyone's ever interested. So the share button should be at the bottom center down there. Is that working for you?
It says Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen.
So if you go up to the top, I think you can re-give it permission when it says that. So I've had the same thing happen, right? So I figure the best way to work through our tech snafus is to talk about them so that if you use StreamYard, which StreamYard is a great, I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with this, right? Like if you're doing PD for your whole school, I think StreamYard actually could be a really cool, site or a tool to use, because then you could just have people asking questions, right? Like if it's a big group and they're not going to really have the space and time for everyone to come on and add questions, you could do this. And it's also, especially if it was something you wanted to make available to your community, right, and have lasting. It's really easy because it goes immediately up. Something like Zoom is probably going to be a little bit more protected, and you can send people the link. This is if you have something you're comfortable with being a little bit more public. So any luck on those share settings?
I'm working on Google Chrome. It will not be able to record until it is quit. I'm going to have to quit and reopen. That's not what I want.
So, and sometimes I've accidentally clicked like no on the permissions, and then I was able to change it. I could see if I could pull yours up. Everybody give us just a second here while Glenn pulls up his. If you have to go out for a second, Glenn, I can talk a little bit how I've used primary sources while you do that.
I'm gonna quit and come back. How about that?
Yep, that sounds good. Okay, so we lost Glenn for just a second. So what we're talking today is again about primary sources and how you can use them in your classes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I can do that. I actually don't think I can share my screen any better than Glenn can. Glenn's already back.
We're gonna try this one more time. How's that?
There we go. We got it.
Sweet.
Okay, let's.
Well, I updated to Big Sur on my Mac, and maybe that just jiggled it just enough to screw me over. So I don't know what you're talking about. Finish your thought while I jump out and jump back in.
I was just going to start talking about the way that I use primary sources in my classes when I work with pre-service teachers, right? And I think one thing is always about primary sources can be challenging if you're curating your own lists, right? And so I think there's a couple of tricks you have to think about. I think sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming to go dive into primary sources to find what you want. And so sometimes one of the best strategies I also give people is look to other people who've already done that work, right? Is to find journal articles where they found primary sources or primary source sets or good DBQs, right? If there's good document-based questions.
Yeah.
And I often will steal them out. And just also, by the way, reading history books is one of the best places to find great primary source documents. We use a book on, I've mentioned, I think before, Ona Judge, who was enslaved by George and Martha Washington.
Yeah.
And in that book, I learned about a letter that George Washington didn't officially author, but he really wrote. And it's an incredible, I spend about 45 minutes with my students just looking at the letter and talking. It's only about 3 short paragraphs, but we spend almost an hour talking about it because there's so much in there to kind of decode about things about the time, just all kinds of differences, and also understanding race and racism at the time. It's really an incredible way to dive into it from a historical perspective. So tell us about your starting 5 and your bench.
Well, first of all, I'm a U.S. history guy, so this is maybe U.S. history centric. I wanted to put some world history things in there as well. So, but my favorite is always going to be the National Archives, and what you'll see on my list here is not the National Archives, the education page. It's education/lessons. Now, here's the thing. This is sort of a secret hack. Like if you go to McDonald's and say, hey, I want your secret menu items. This is the secret menu item for the National Archives, because there's not a link to this. It's still on their website. They still update it. They still do stuff with it, but you can't find a link to it. This used to be there, but you can't get there from their education page. So if you go to the blog that I wrote on HistoryTech, glennwiebe.org, you're going to see this link, archives.gov/education/lessons. They have, obviously, on the National Archives, you can do a search for all of your primary sources, right? You just go up to the top and do that search. But I always show teachers this page, because just like you were talking about the letter that George Washington did or did not write, or had somebody else write for him, right? Excuse me. We want to have kids and teachers use those primary sources as part of instruction. So this particular page has a couple of different things that are really powerful. So first of all, it's got this document analysis stuff. So if you click on this or any of these links right here, it takes you to a page where you and your students can access these primary source analysis worksheets. So it's not just the primary sources. It's just like Dan said, it's what you do with the primary sources. And these analysis worksheets are really, really handy. And you can get elementary version, you can get secondary version, you can get HTML versions that kids can work on their devices. You can get PDFs to print out and give hard copies to kids. This is really powerful. And yeah, you can get this other places, but I love this page because everything is in one place. And again, why did they hide it? I have no idea. Right.
And I'll add real quick, Glenn. I use those. I actually just, have made copies of those, printed them out and laminated them, and I just hand them to my students. Right. Yeah. It's really easy because what we're doing is when we're doing primary sources at the beginning of the year, instead of me having to go through and teach everything, I just hand them that and tell them. I was like, here's like how you think through this. I give them something to do, and I give them the primary sources and let them start to figure out. Then I come back and answer questions and help them think about those primary source questions. And so it's a great way. So many teachers, I always tell them, find out the ways to take that pressure off yourself. Teaching is about learning. It's not about, talking. And that's one of my favorite strategies.
And absolutely. And another way that I've seen teachers use this, I love that lamination idea. How cool is that? And even maybe that kids could write on them.
They can write on them then, yeah.
Yes. And erase later. That's perfect for like middle school kids, because you got first hour, second hour, third hour, fourth hour, lunch, fifth hour, sixth hour. Just do that. Erase it, start over. Perfect. Saves on paper, saves on copies. I like these too, because as a teacher, when you do get into that, okay, now I'm going to show you how to do it. It's a great sort of think aloud that kids can follow along with, that you like that the letter that George Washington had somebody write for him. You get out that primary source analysis worksheet for a document, and you, the teacher, then go through each of those questions and go, oh, so what I'm looking for here, and you do that think aloud, literally demonstrate for your students. We just assume kids know how to do some of those things, but a 12, 13-year-old kid, never done this before, they want to see you do it. They want to hear you do it. So yes, I'm going to steal the lamination idea, but then have kids literally, as you're going along, they could be filling that out on that sheet too. That's awesome. I love that idea. Further down this list, and again, we're trying to keep this pretty short today because what's happening later? Basketball. So we got to keep moving. But at the bottom of this sheet is lesson plans. And again, even if you're teaching some world, there's some world crossover here. Obviously, U.S. National Archives is going to focus on U.S. history. But if I go to Great Depression and World War II, it literally, what this does is each of those chronological periods has, 6, 7, 8, 9 different lesson plans that have documents and primary sources that you can use right away that are tied to that lesson. So you've got the primary sources that you can download, print out, give to your kids, link directly on your Google Classroom or whatever. But you also have right up here the teaching activities, for example. And it walks you through step by step what you're supposed to do as the teacher. So not only does it give you the primary sources, but it gives you the lessons. So this page where you start from on our PDF handout today gives you access to all of these things in one place. And that's why, again, why the heck would you hide it? I don't know, but they did. Here it is. Bookmark it. Don't lose it, because it should be part of your starting five. That's what I'm saying.
And I'll add that, Doc's Teach right there is that's my go-to for searching for a single source, right? When my students are searching for a single source, and I've done lessons through that. It's really, really a helpful site. And that's where I tell them to go through and do it for initial search, especially if there's not larger sets that already help. I'll add one short piece of advice, Glenn, is that
absolutely.
There's no right way or one way to use a primary source. I always want to say that, because I think we often emphasize a great way to use primary sources, which is to give students questions and let them try to figure out what's going on. I'm going to say, though, some primary sources really require some context from the teacher, or the students will just be lost, right? They can't always, every primary source is not made to be like a curiosity kind of like allow them to just let their curiosity run. You end up wasting a lot of time because they don't sometimes know what they're looking at yet. And so sometimes it does work. Sometimes there's sources where it's great to just let them be curious and think about it. Then other sources I've found that that's not a good use of our time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The political cartoons is, I think, a good example of that. I mean, you think, well, it's a visual, it should be easy for kids to figure out. But if they don't have that context, I think you're exactly right. Political cartoons are hard, for example, if they don't have that background. So helping them walk through that makes a lot of sense. No, absolutely. All right. So this, by the way, this is the front page of the National Archives teacher page, educator page. It's good. There's some stuff here, but it's hard to find that little hidden page. All right. My second one, Library of Congress. Love it, love it, love it. Has always been one of my favorites. And again, I don't want to spend a ton of time here. You guys can go and figure this out on your own. But if you go to the Library of Congress, this is how you can get to it. The PDF on the blog post takes you directly to the educator, the teacher page. It looks like this. And just so you know, they have changed. They've done a lot of work on this page. They've taken some things off. They've rearranged some things. Lots of places that you can go, but you're probably going to want to go here, classroom materials, and then start scrolling through here. And I love this, the one at the top, primary source sets, right? And again, Dan's talking about, well, if you know exactly what you're looking for, and you know that, like, okay, now I'm going to talk about Abraham Lincoln. There it is. There's a bunch of stuff. So come here. If you know, like, the period of time that you're looking for, if you know the sort of topic that you want your kids to mess with, that this is what your unit or your activity is focused on. And it is alphabetical, so you can do a search and, you know, like hit Control F or Command F and find it. These are really nice just because they're source sets, right? So they have a bunch of stuff about one topic. They have done a better job, I think. If you go to the top, you can do a search. And obviously, Library of Congress has millions of primary sources, right? It was difficult back in the day to search and find things because the website was organized like an archivist would organize it, not like how a teacher would organize it. Like me and Dan would go, oh, World War II, that's under the W's. Well, no, that's going to be under something else because that's how an archivist is going to arrange it. So they've done, I think, a better job of letting you, like, I just need a map, or I need a newspaper, or I need a book, or I need whatever, and do a search that way. If you can't find here at the primary source sets with teachers, come up to the top. You're going to find some stuff here for sure.
I love it. And I love to mine those primary set sources, right? So you go in the source, you pick out your favorite 3, and then you add them to your lecture. You give them to students as an activity. I really love doing that. I'm a big, you know, I think document-based question activities and like essays became really popular for a while. And I'm really big into the mini, like 20 minutes. Here's 4 sources and here's 2 questions, and you have 20 minutes and you walk around the classroom and work with students, or you know, let them do it digitally if your costs are that. So
yeah, and I love when you said digitally, because I started calling these media-based questions, not document-based questions. Yeah. You know, so I'm going to use Google Forms, and you can do this. Anybody can do this, right? You just go and create a Google form, make a question, add a link, or upload your photo or a YouTube video or a map. It's all right there, and it's, you know, like you said, 15, 20 minutes, and you're good.
I'll add one other comment. There's some really long primary sources in there, you'll notice. And it just, if you're working with long sources, be very cognizant of, especially if the language of the time is harder to read, you got to work through it together. Sometimes I'll break it up, or sometimes I'll do it as a class if we're looking at a longer one. I tend to prefer, you know, images, shorter documents, but if you're doing a long one, I wouldn't just hand that one over, because students will get bored.
Well, and this is always a topic, you know, again, we could drag this out. I'm not gonna, but maybe for next time, is it okay to modify a primary source, Dan? I think you and I have talked about this before. I think it is, especially for middle school kids, elementary kids. You give them the Declaration of Independence as a fifth grader, and they go, "What?" So to modify those or change those, or make sure that they have a word bank of vocabulary words, so they can start working through that. That's a whole nother conversation.
The Stanford History Education Group on their site, they modify a lot of their sources, and they have a nice explanation for it if you want to discuss it. And that's worth discussing with students. Why would we modify a source, right?
Yeah. And so we won't get to all my bench players. We're going to just do the first 5 starters. Sheg is always going to be a bench player, if not a starter, because of one of my biggest things is the lessons, but it's those modified documents, and they are just like hardcore about we're going to modify stuff. How are kids going to access what we want them to access without making it more available to them in ways that they can understand? So I really appreciate Sheg and their dedication of saying yes. I think Sam Weinberg wrote an article once called Tampering with History. He says that's our job as teachers, is to tamper with history. I think he said unabashedly supporting the modification of primary sources. I'm going, all right, Sam, you're my hero. Okay, I got 3 left. Fab 5. This one, you take a look at this. This one, by the way, has been around forever. I remember this 20 years ago, 25. I don't know, as long as the internet's been around. This Internet History Sourcebook project has been around as well. And it is mostly text-based. But the beauty of this is take a look along this left-hand side. There is just a ton of stuff in all different categories that you can go and find. I share this with 6th grade teachers, for example, all the time, because where do I find primary sources in African or Asian or Indian history? Well, we can find lots of primary sources in these different places. And so definitely, if you're a world history teacher, this is where you can find a lot of textual primary sources in lots of different content areas and in lots of different periods of history. So definitely, it's not fancy, but there's a lot here, and it's easy to get lost in here because you're going to start to dig up a bunch of stuff that you can use. Absolutely. All right, my last 2 favorites. This has always been a go-to. Chronicling America, the Library of Congress created this. I don't even know how long ago, Dan. Are you even aware how long it's been? It's been around for a long time, right?
Yeah, and they've updated it over kind of time, right? Yeah, it's changed a bit.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that I like about this is up until about really last fall. I'm not even sure exactly when they did it because it wasn't a big deal. They just all of a sudden I noticed this. Digitized newspapers up until like 1924. And they've added about now 40 years up until 1963. So in the olden days, in the before times, you could go here if you were U.S., up until turn of the century, because they didn't have a lot of newspapers past that period of time. And now it goes up to 1963. So you're going to be able to find a ton of stuff. Most of the newspapers that you're going to find here, Dan, are like no-name kind of papers. You're not going to find New York Times here, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune. You're not going to find those newspapers, but you're going to find just like those local mom and pop kind of places. You're going to find African-American Black newspapers here if you know exactly what you're looking for. But you can just do a search. Like we did a search a couple weeks ago on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and found newspaper headlines from that period, different parts of the country, and one going, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What has happened? And another one going, yes, wonderful news. Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. So you get that sort of chance to go and find newspapers from different parts of the country, different parts of time, and they are the entire newspaper. So if it's 30 pages of stuff, you get all the pages. I mean, you're flipping through like letters to the editor and ads and, sales at, whatever. It's just mind blowing. There is transcription, so you can get character recognition. You can copy and paste PDFs. You can download stuff, print things out. This is really powerful as a primary source. Absolutely.
And Glenn, can you go to the all digitized newspapers tab right there? It's right in the center above the search bar
Right here.
right there. See that? Yeah, click that there. And if you look at states and ethnicity, look at you can see all that they actually have like ethnic like newspapers, right? And this could be a really incredible way of studying different communities, different immigrant communities in particular. I went and searched Black newspapers in Oklahoma because I think I've mentioned maybe before, one of my favorite projects I ever did in college is I had to go look at a newspaper like over a certain period of time that related to our course. And I looked at, I think it was World War II from the Oklahoma City Black Dispatch, which was a pretty major Black paper at that time.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating. You really saw evidence of the double V campaign, right?
Yeah.
Victory abroad and victory at home, the fight for civil rights too. And it was a really cool experience. And I think this is great for research projects. So if you want a simple activity to do with newspapers, that's one I would suggest. Probably older students, but it would be a great research activity. But you could just pick an event, right? Like let's look at an event where you would likely see very different perspectives, and let's explore that, whether it's Lincoln's assassination,
right,
or whatever else.
Yeah, we won't go into it, but even just I'm just gonna like Spanish flu. What do we got? Like if I want to compare then and now in terms of the pandemic, that's the kind of stuff that we can go out and look for. I'm stuck here in the Arizona Republican, but there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of newspapers that you can go and dig through to find just what you're looking for. Pretty amazing stuff.
And again, I when you mentioned the Spanish influenza, right? The first thing I think of is I read Kenneth C. Davis's book, More Deadly Than War. Kenneth C. Davis is a great friend of social studies teachers, but I remember in that book him using primary sources, which is really great. It's written for students, and that's oftentimes reading books like that is where I actually come across some of the best ones, because he's a historian who spent all his time searching for everything, right? And then he did all that work, found the best sources, and then I pulled him out after I read the book, and I knew all the context and can use them in class and look like I'm super smart.
Dan, you are super smart.
No, it's all a charade.
It's all Kid Davis. All right, my last one, my Fab Five. I learned about this a couple years ago, and it's just gotten better and better. This is basically the Smithsonian Museum's system attempt to try to digitize as much of their stuff as possible. Right? Think about that. I don't even know how many museums they have, 17, 18. And they are trying to get as many of those museums to digitize primary sources as they possibly can. We were told at one time, on average, they digitize a new primary source every 7 seconds. So you can, as a teacher or a student, go in and click Discover and literally do a search for whatever you want to search for and find whatever you want to find, and then use it however you want to use it. Now, the problem obviously is, well, I found all this really cool stuff. What do I do with it now? Where do I put it? Well, here's the cool part. You can create an account using your Google single sign-on or just your email address if you want. And everything that you find goes into your account. And the beauty of all of this is not only can you find individual things, but you can take those individual things and drop them into collections. You can then share those collections with your students. You can embed questions, writing prompts, thinking prompts, group work into those collections. You can upload your own primary source documents and resources into those collections, and then share those out with students. Students can create their own accounts and create their own collections and share them with you. And there's just so many different ways that you can use this. There are millions of primary sources on this Smithsonian Learning Lab. And the cool part is Dan makes a collection about George Washington and the letters that he wrote. I can go and do a search, George Washington letters, Dan's collection pops up. Guess what I get to do? I click it, click the heart beside that collection. That collection now drops into my account. Now it's my copy of his collection. He still has his, but I have all his stuff. Thanks, Dan. And not only is Smithsonian creating collections, but other teachers, thousands of other teachers are creating collections that you now have the ability to go and grab and make your own, adapt, edit, change, and then share it to your kids. This is the way primary sources are going to look in the future, because here it is, right? This is what the Library of Congress, for example, is trying to do with some of their work and how they change their website. Smithsonian's doing it. It's phenomenal.
I love that collaborative approach, because again, sometimes it's just about finding the sources, right? And so I could see a department, I could see a social studies methods class where everybody goes and kind of each semester you split it up, right? I was in a huge social studies department, so we had a bunch of people teaching over the course of a year. So maybe each semester we say, okay, I'm going to pick one topic, develop a primary source set. Next year it'll be ready for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is such a collaborative sort of thing. You're exactly right. Anywhere, anytime, you and your students, other teachers, other professionals have access to whatever you share with them and open up to them. You can protect it. You can open it up to certain groups of people. It's a lot like Google Documents or Google Drive. You can either look at it, you have access to it, or nope, cutting Dan off, you can't even look anymore. I mean, there's just so much you can do on Smithsonian Learning Lab. And so those are my Fab Five. They may change next week. I don't know. But you saw in that PDF, I had my 5, but there's like 8 or 9 on the bench ready to go. And they're next week, they may be just as good. Who knows? You know, and when I asked earlier, Dan, did you coach? I know you were looking forward to that. I remember coaching. That was one of the biggest problems I always had. It's Friday. Who do I start?
Right.
And that week, you know, Smithsonian Learning Lab stunk it up. So no, you're on the bench and somebody else is going to go in. And so these are all good. These are just my favorite 5 right today. So go to glennwiebe.org. You can get this link and download the PDF, use it however you want. Hopefully it's going to be useful for you. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Dan, what else we got?
That's it. I appreciate everyone joining. Again, we got Glenn Wiebe's site on the screen right now. We will check the notes in the description in the YouTube video, and we'll have a link to this blog post that links you to the Google Doc, which is going to be my new go-to. And to finish up, Glenn, I'll just echo your point. For new teachers or somebody getting into primary sources, pick one of those sites and use it, right? I think the thing is we sometimes overwhelm ourselves with choices, and then you add one to your repertoire the next year or the next semester, right? You can't do everything. So, there's a lot of cool ways to use primary sources. And I'll tell you, I've been really heartened by the ways that a lot of social studies teachers see this not as just exploring geography or history, but it's a way of helping to sit back and critically think about our world. I know I participated in SS Chat after the insurrection, and a lot of teachers, their strategy for the next day was to use images of the day and allow students to use those same primary source strategies to analyze what happened, and it allowed a space for them to talk about it, to reflect on it, to look at different perspectives and understand how you talk about a different event like an insurrection, which is a culmination of many different things, which we're not going to get into here. But so the skills that come with this too, about looking at the world and critically looking, I think are very relevant for today too. So thanks for sharing those sites. That'll help us get there, Glenn.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us.
See ya.
We will see you next month.